Hello, welcome to another edition of North Coast History and Haunts. In today's episode, we're going to explore the last walk of Beverly Potts. This will be part 3 in a 3-part series, and we're going to go over some details today, including some suspects. We're going to look at some places that were searched and the great lengths that the authorities went to really try to find Beverly. Beverly Potts, to catch up to speed, age 10, disappeared from this park on August 24th, 1951, and was never seen from again. Foul play was suspected, nobody was charged despite multiple suspects, and the case remains open to this day with a $15,000 reward. Today, we're standing at the southwest corner of Halloran Park here in Cleveland, Ohio, and this is the exact spot where the show wagon event was held on August 24th in 1951. Beverly and her friend Patsy Swing went to the park and they separated. Patsy went home first, leaving Beverly behind. They argued a little bit, but Beverly didn't want to go. Now, Beverly was known to be shy around people, especially men. And so that led to speculation that a woman might have been involved, in fact, a woman that she might know. So what we're going to do here is we're going to walk away from the show wagon event. We're going to walk toward Beverly's house. This is the exact route Beverly would have taken. Now, during the night, several people came forward and said they had seen Beverly there at the show wagon, and a couple classmates reported waving to her, but there's going to be one distinct point here that I want to make. A newspaper boy named Fred Krause, he delivered papers to Lynette Avenue where the Pottses lived, and he said that he knew Beverly. In fact, he knew her from her distinctive duck-like walk. So he was riding his bike, he was going home, his mother was already home, and his father was close behind him. So Fred was riding his bike here, it's probably around 9:30, it was probably dark, and he said he almost ran into Beverly. He had to kind of dodge to get out of her way. So what we're going to do here is we're going to walk toward Beverly's house, and the street that you see is West 117th, and that's on the west side of Cleveland. It was a busy street then, and it's a busy street now. So Beverly would have been walking home. Fred said that he had seen her walking, and we're going to stop and show you the point where he would have seen her. Several other people said that they reported seeing Beverly at some point during the show. An off-duty policeman also said that he had seen a guy making lewd gestures toward women, and he kind of disappeared. He said there were also appeared to be other 2 troublemakers, one blonde and one brunette, younger men, and he had seen them go behind a billboard, and that was it. So there were thousands upon thousands of leads that came pouring in, and the police had to report on every one. Okay, so we're walking toward, now imagine it's night, and there's not many lights today, just like there weren't many lights back then, and that was kind of a problem with this park. It was known to attract vagrants and troublemakers. So the sidewalk that Beverly was said to be walking on was diagonal, and we're going to go diagonal here to this intersection. Now, if Beverly was walking toward this intersection, again, it's dark, and there were probably a lot of people around her. It's probably similar to a sporting event letting out. So it's hard to conceive somebody could have abducted her without anybody noticing. It's certainly, of course, possible, but not probable. So we're going to take a look here. This is the approximate location that the paper boy is said to have seen Beverly Potts walking toward her home. Now, he swerved his bike around her. Now, I want you to take a look at how close we are to that intersection. That is super close. And this is the last time anyone would claim to see Beverly alive again. So if Beverly is walking, it's dark, and she's walking toward the intersection. She's going to hop on Lynette Avenue and then walk home. There's going to be 2 buildings that we're looking at straight ahead. The one thing we're going to notice here, there was a 1937 black Dodge Coupe that said that it parked at the intersection of 117th and Lynette, and Beverly was seen hanging around it. So if you see, that car might have been blocking her way. If it was somebody she knew, it would have been natural for her to approach the car. But there was a black coupe, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. So let's look across, and we see Walter's Bar. Walter's Bar was known to be kind of a problem bar, and there was a lot of low lifes, and if there was trouble to be found, you could find it at Walter's Bar. So Beverly probably would have avoided that. In fact, she probably would have gone to the other side of the intersection here or walked diagonally across. It's a busy street and I don't want to get hit by a car, so we're going to wait just a quick second here. Now, off to the left, we're going to glance at it here really quick, was a gas station. Today I think it's a tire place, but the lady who ran the gas station said when she got out of work at 11, the park was deserted. So let's cross the street here. This is exactly where Beverly would have been. And across the street was kind of a candy store. And we're going to cross right here in a second. So it's been natural for Beverly would have been natural for her to cross over. I don't know if the candy store was open during that time, but it at least would have afforded her a degree of safety. So if she's walking toward here now, Fred Krause, the newspaper boy, his mother said she was out on the lawn not too far down the street. So that wouldn't have been a huge opportunity if something were to have befallen Beverly. That's a very short amount of time. Now granted, it was dark, but with an estimated 1,500 people letting out of the show wagon, it would have been conceivable that there would have been other people around. So it kind of lends credence to the theory about it had to be somebody she knew. Her immediate family all checked out. They were at home watching an Indians baseball game. As a matter of fact, the Swings next door were doing the same thing. They were watching the same game. Furthermore, they said that Beverly had a naturally happy home, that her father didn't abuse her, didn't spank her, and there was really no reason for her to run away, especially at such an early age. So as we walk down the street here, Fred Krause's mother's house and his family house is going to be up here on the left. And we're going to turn around. We're going to show you how close to Halloran Park we really are. So this is his house here on the left. We're going to stop and we're going to turn around and take a look. But you can see exactly how close. Now, it's reasonable to assume that Fred Krause's mother probably wasn't there watching every single move, but if she was in the front yard, you can see how close these houses are to each other. It stands to reason she would have seen something. Now, if Beverly was on the opposite side of the street and if it was dark, maybe she could have slipped by, but let's look back. You can see those cars, and that's 117. That's a very short distance from Fred Krause's mother's vision to where Fred Krause himself avoided her, unless one of them is not telling the truth. And that's really part of the problem, is that there was such intense pressure to resolve this case that people began reporting false information. The police were desperate to solve it, so they were going to follow up on any lead. So virtually any lead that they had, no matter how crazy it was, they would follow up on. In fact, they would go to Beverly Potts' school and interview over 400 students. They went door to door and conducted a search of these houses on Lynette Avenue, and nobody refused. From attic to basement, they searched, and what they were looking for was depressions in the ground. Now, a lot of these garages during the day had dirt floors, so it would have been easy to bury something in the dirt, but you can see how close these houses are, so the reality is, it would have been hard to hide something from your neighbors. So that leads me to think that maybe she didn't get abducted in there. Maybe she got lost. Maybe she went to the other side of the park, and we're going to take a look at that in a minute. We're now walking toward the Potts' house, and this is exactly where she would have been. Her and Patsy would have been returning. Now, you know, of course, Patsy returned, but Beverly did not. And we're going to approach the Potts' resident coming up just up here on our left. And interestingly enough, nobody on the street today has any clue any of this took place. When I was doing the research for this project, a few people knew, but for the most part, this case is really forgotten, especially in this neighborhood. So here it is. This is the Potts' house back in the day. 11304 Lynette Avenue. Now let's go back to Halloran Park. And we are back at Halloran Park. We're in the southwest corner, and this is exactly where the show wagon event would have taken place. One of the reasons that I wanted to show you this video was to illustrate how dark and creepy this western wall, and that's what we're looking at, the western edge of Halloran Park is. Where we're looking at straight ahead, we're looking south, and that was a large undeveloped tract of land. There was a lot of vacant lots. In fact, there's one there today we're going to take a look at. So this might have been a weirder place. Let's say Beverly got lost, or maybe she did see a classmate that she knew and she decided to go with her. She was known for frequently being late. In fact, she was grounded for that very fact. And it's horrible to think that maybe that somehow led to her disappearance. So we're in the southwest corner of Halloran Park, and we're just kind of looking around. This is what the view would have been for the show wagon event. When Beverly didn't come home, her father Robert became immediately concerned and went and searched the park. He searched for over an hour. He did not find anything. He came back home and immediately called the police. In fact, the family said they called the police a total of 4 times before the police finally showed up at around midnight. By then, other neighbors had heard the word, and they had gathered in groups to begin searching for Beverly as well. So as we walk along this fence line here, look ahead, you can see that vacant lot, and this is just how creepy and dark and frankly dangerous this park was. Back then there was woods adjacent to it, and it was known to attract vagrants and other people just looking for trouble. And it could be found here at Halloran Park. There was a lot of pressure to solve this case, and a lot of the people that they interviewed, including a lot of the children, either altered their stories or remembered things after the fact, including Beverly's best friend, Patsy. A week later, after the initial Beverly disappeared, Patsy came forward with this detail that when she was there, she thought she remembered a short, plump woman who was resting a hand on Beverly's shoulders and saying something to the effect of, "Oh, I know somebody there in the show." And that was kind of an example of some of the stories and how they kind of changed over time immediately from when the initial event took place to shortly thereafter, including the newspaper boy Fred Krause. I think that there was a week later where he came forward and said, "Hey, no, I remember seeing Beverly there that night." So in the crowd, there was off-duty policemen. At least 25 people came forward to say that they had seen Beverly at some point or in some capacity. One of the gentlemen that was at the show that night, he said he had observed a dark-colored coupe with a man in his 50s inside who was cruising the area and seemed to be watching for young kids. As well, another witness reported seeing 2 young men in their early 20s watching young girls, and they were on foot. Another show wagon guest reported seeing a girl matching Beverly's description talking to 2 men. They were in a car, a dark green or black 1937 or 1938 coupe, and we kind of took a look at that when Beverly was crossing the street. And these reports came out around 9:15 to 9:30. Nobody had actually seen Beverly enter the car. She was simply seen talking to the men. The park was completely dead and empty at around 10 o'clock at night. The show wagon had long been over, and it's assumed Beverly had disappeared somewhere, obviously, before that time. But because nobody heard her to struggle, law enforcement were generally operating under the conclusion that Beverly probably knew whoever did it. A cab driver came forward and said that he had picked up 2 customers on the edge of Halloran Park that night around 9 o'clock. One of them said to be looked Polish. Another one was a girl who looked to be around 11. He said that he dropped the pair off at the bus station and he went on his way. So as we're walking here, there's that vacant lot. You can see exactly how much this would have afforded somebody a chance to abduct a child. Today there's a lot of cameras in place for good reason. And we're going to walk around the block of sorts here, and we're just going to show you how creepy it truly is and was. Now, Beverly was known to be cautious, especially around men, but maybe a little more comfortable around women, and so there was a natural conclusion that perhaps a woman was involved. The Pottses, for their part, their lives were, in essence, over. It became a circus. Newspapermen were camped there in their house, and they had to relive this horrible, horrible day over and over again. People began calling the phone number prank calls day and night, and it was horrible because the Pottses were just looking for any sign of their lost daughter, and here they had to endure this torture. 3 weeks after Beverly's disappearance, police asked to search each home on Lynette Avenue in an attempt to find clues, and they did just that. No household was said to have refused the search. On November 9th, a mysterious person called Robert Potts while he was at work, and he demanded to know why the Potts' phone number was no longer working. They were forced to turn it off just for the sheer number of crank calls that were being made. The caller demanded a ransom, and only if the Potts' phone number was reinstated. So the Potts did it. They had their phone reconnected, and several days later, the man called the house again and tried to arrange a money drop. He promised to release Betsy in exchange for $25,000. He claimed that while Beverly was pretty sick, he promised that she was still alive. So a few days later, a male detective dressed up like Elizabeth, and this is what the caller specified, and he went there to exchange the money drop for Beverly. But the kidnapper must have sensed the trap, and he tried to flee the area. They arrested Frank Dale Davis, who admitted he was just looking for some quick cash. He was convicted of fraud and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Subsequent investigation shows he had nothing to do with Beverly's disappearance, unfortunately. Around a month later, an even crazier situation took place. A man called himself Tom, who called Lester Swing, and this was Patsy Swing's father, and claimed that he had Beverly. He claimed that he had hit Beverly with his car in August, but he thought she was dead, but in reality, she was not. She was still alive, and she was only stunned and now had a bad case of amnesia. And so what the caller wanted Mr. Swing to do was dress Patsy up in the same clothes as Beverly was last seen in, and then have her stand at a magazine counter at the local May Company department store in downtown Cleveland. However, they used a decoy, and this Tom person saw through the decoy. He rearranged the whole thing, and at the end of the day, a gentleman by the name of Stephen Tykady admitted to making the phone calls. The whole plan fell apart, although he was cleared of any involvement in Beverly's case. In late 1951, one man claimed that he had seen a car near Halloran Park with a screaming girl tied up in the back seat. The car was supposedly cruising down West 117th. Police checked out the lead, but unfortunately nothing became of it. As well, several psychics and clairvoyants also supposedly contacted the police, but their stories proved fruitless except for one, and we're going to take a look at that in a second. So as the year came to an end, nobody had any clue. There were no true viable suspects, and all these stories were simply running out. The police were desperate for answers. Now, let's take a look at some of the suspects they did have. What we're going to do now is we're going to turn and drive, in essence, behind Halloran Park. We're heading north on West 120th, and to our right are the houses that butt up against Halloran Park. You can see how close together they are. In a minute, we're going to take a look at just how kind of dark and desolate the backs of these houses are. And this is kind of indicative of the entire neighborhood, including Lynette. But this would have been a perfect opportunity for somebody to grab Beverly and just hide her back there. And now we're heading south away from Halloran Park. We're heading down West 117th. And a lot of this property, as you see today, is pretty built up. But back then, a lot of it was vacant fields, especially as we get to this busy intersection up here of Bel Air. So once you cross over that, there's a set of railroad tracks that were in place. And the railroad tracks were known to be of particular focus. A lot of people were involved in this search. Everybody from the National Guard to over 600 Boy Scouts to the garbage men. Everybody was mobilized to search all the available spots that they could think of, all the abandoned properties, vacant lots, you name it, and they searched. No matter how crazy it was, they had to go. So we're gonna pass by the notorious Lindale speed trap, coming right up here on our left. Coming into view also is the railroad tracks, and today this is still kind of a rugged wilderness, but when they initially searched the day that she came missing, somehow they found a lead that she was here. So when they went here, they found that there was over 150 shipping rail containers full of coal that they had to search. Not only that, but the rail yards itself was desolate, and we're going to magically change the cloudy day into a sunny day here. Let's go take a look back here, and you can see how problematic and just what a huge daunting task it must have been to search for this. There's not many here today, but imagine 150 of these things full of coal that somebody had to go through and look for Beverly, and just that sheer desperation and how monumental the task must have been. Incredibly heartbreaking to think that she could be in there. And you're going to see some of the cops and the kids looking for her around this area. Another area that was an area of focus was a place called Big Creek, and there was a culvert at the end of the park, the south end. That's gone now. They've redone it. But it was another area we're going to take a look at that they focused on the search for her. So you can see this land is still a little bit rugged and a little bit desolate. It's part of the railroad. A little bit farther down the street where we're going to travel is what they call Big Creek Parkway. We're going to hustle through this orange light and we're going to take a look. So this was another area that they would have been looking for her, any sign of her. Not only did they receive word, but just from the natural location that they would have searched. So we're going to travel back here and we're going to take a look. But in the meantime, let's talk about some suspects. So a variety of people were looked at as potential suspects, but we're going to focus on 4 of them today. One of them was a guy named William Slates, and 4 days after Beverly's disappearance, the paper announced that police had a suspect, and the Cleveland guy was referred to as Bill. His name was William Slates. He was a former soldier who was discharged in 1949 after making sexual advances on an 8-year-old girl. In 1951, Slates, who was on probation for his crimes, was living with his mother on 166th Street near Halloran Park. His mother went on vacation. At the time, he was seeing a 17-year-old telephone operator as well as working odd jobs. On Sunday, August 26th, Slates borrowed a friend's car, locked up his mother's home, went to Columbus, and checked into a hotel under a false identity, all for apparently no reason. He could give no explanation for leaving Cleveland so abruptly, and the Columbus police tracked him down. He was interviewed repeatedly and failed several polygraphs. After about a week or so, his girlfriend came forward and provided him with an alibi, claiming that they were making out at Edgewater Park in Cleveland at the time of Beverly's disappearance. So here in the video, we're walking through the Big Creek Park. It's a nice park today, but it's known for creepy weirdos hanging out even today. Another suspect they came up with was something known as the Speed Queen. And less than a week after her disappearance, rumors began to circulate that a local speed queen and her friends were responsible for Beverly's death. And a speed queen was nothing more than a young lady who liked to drive fast hot rods and sports cars. This idea of a speed queen, something to the effect of a hot rodder named Barbara Saunders loaned her car to her boyfriend's brother and some of his friends. They got into a wreck, and they called her up to advise her, hey, we've been in an accident. Don't go looking for your car. The cops need to see it. So when Barbara supposedly retrieved the car, the next day from a wooded area, she said that there was some blood in the bumper as well as a few strands of cloth. On August 31st, the Cleveland Police Department decided to conduct a dig in the area where the car was abandoned to search for clues as well as graves. However, no evidence was found during that search. Her car was also searched. A few strands of blonde hair were found stuck in the door hinge, and they were collected as evidence. Overall, though, the investigators found the story is probably not likely. It's just a sensationalistic story at that point. there's probably no way she could have hit anybody with a car without anybody knowing. The next guy we're going to take a look at is a guy named Harvey Lee Rush. And Harvey Lee was a Cleveland guy who was kind of living a hard and fast life. He was kind of a rough and tumble guy. He'd had over 100 arrests in his life, mostly for petty crimes like public intoxication and fights. And he found himself out in California. He had a problem with drinking, and it would affect his entire life. In 1955, he somehow had a story to tell. He said that in 1952 he had abducted a girl and killed a girl in Cleveland, and he explained that one day while he was at a circus or a puppet show, he lured a young girl away from the show with the promise of candy. He took her under the bridge with the promise of ice cream, and he killed her by punching her, and she landed on some rocks. So once the Cleveland authorities found out about it, they extradited this guy to Cleveland, and it turns out he had made up the whole story simply because he wanted a free trip back home. So here we are watching the video, and this is a place they would have been looking for Beverly, and it wasn't as nice as it was back then. And we're going to show you a picture of probably what it looked like when they were looking for Beverly here. This is the Big Creek Parkway, and this would have ran directly behind Halloran Park, where Beverly was last seen. And so the next place we're going to take a look at is this place. It's Anchor Cleaning Contractors today, but back in 1980 it was known as Jim's Garage. A retired Cleveland police detective announced he had solved the case. In 1974, he said that early in the 1970s a man called in a tip to the Cleveland police department claiming that his brother had confessed to Beverly's murder. And his auto body shop was searched, and the floor was dug up, and there they are digging up the floor. I think they described as digging up a grease pit. It doesn't sound like a very fun job, but of course no sign of Beverly ever came of it. But this is what it looks like today. Our next place we're going to take a look at is a little trail here in the Rocky River Park. And it was rumored that Beverly may have met her end at, they described it as a hill, so it's across the river and to the left. Here we're going to take a look at, but you can see now this place is getting further and further away of what they're searching. This is well away from Beverly Potts' house. But that hill is off to the left. The next place we're going to take a look at is Edgewater Park. Edgewater Park was similar to Halloran. Edgewater is a little bit bigger, but it was certainly creepy and it was dangerous at dark. But this holds an important distinction. Not only did they search it by horseback, looking for any signs of Beverly, but if you remember from our story, this was also the location where our suspect William Slates allegedly had been making out with his 17-year-old girlfriend. The next place we're going to look at is the Rocky River. This is the mouth of Lake Erie, and what had happened was here on October 9th, a fisherman was fishing from this very pier, and he caught a piece of red cloth on his hook. He didn't think too much of it, threw it on the shore, then he kind of put it all together in his head. So the next evening he went back and he alerted the police, who they dredged the river, and it was only 10 feet deep, but they had boats, they had divers. A piece of blue cloth was found, as well as a clump of hair attached to a soggy substance. However, upon closer examination, it was determined to be a fabric from a bathing suit. The next place we're going to look at here is a place called Metropolitan Park, and this has the unique distinction of this was the only known instance where a psychic advised the police where to dig. It was kind of done on the down low, and the police went along with it. They went back on multiple days. They dug up a lot of the park. However, of course, no sign of Beverly was ever found. And here's the picture of the police digging. They don't look too happy about it, certainly at that. The very last suspect that we're going to talk about is one Mr. William Henry Redmond. A lot of people like to point to this guy as probably the main suspect, although I'm not sure that's deserved. Mr. Redmond was a Ferris wheel operator who lived all over the country on account of his job, but Ohio and Pennsylvania is where he focused a lot of his time. He had a reputation of perpetrating brutally violent sex crimes starting when he was 13 years old. We're going to talk about him in a second. Instead, we're going to pop over here and show you the Cuyahoga River and what had happened here. There was a guy who was working. He had seen what he described as a bundle floating in the Cuyahoga River. It was about 5 feet long, and it was floating in a sluggish way. The more he looked at it, he was convinced it was a human body wrapped in a tarp with arms, hair, and feet sticking out. He immediately notified the police. The river was dragged. Divers were sent out, and witnesses were interviewed. However, nothing became of it. Several people downriver reported too they had seen the same bundle that day, September 4th. However, after 2 days of no findings, it was determined that whatever it was had likely floated out into the lake area, never to be seen from again. Let's go back really quick and talk about our last suspect really quick. This William Henry Redmond. He was convicted when he was 13 years old of sex crimes, although it was never conclusively proven that he was in Ohio working during that exact time. So as time went on, life began to return to somewhat normal, except for the Potts' family. Beverly Potts' mother, Elizabeth, she would pass away 4 years later, and people said she died of a broken heart. Her father, Robert, lived until 1970 in the same home, and he really tried hard just to fade away and not have constant reminders of what he lost. So this has been the story of Beverly Potts. We hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, like and subscribe. If you have any ideas for additional videos, please leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more.